Thank you everyone for joining us. Today I've got Mark Steed, who is the Principal and CEO of Kellett School in Hong Kong. He's worked in many top UK independent schools as a teacher in the UK as well as abroad in Devon and in Dubai and now in Hong Kong. He has degrees from Cambridge and Nottingham universities and an executive and Masters in Management. You might well know his name already from copious articles in entails. He does some great content, great writing. He's got some great insights. I'm excited to hand you over to Mark, who's going to chair today's session. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, and it's great. I'm really disappointed I can't be with you all in person today at the conference. I'm really suffering from FOMO today, so it would be lovely to be there. But it's nice to be able to be involved. And what I'm going to do today is to talk a little bit about propose a new model for talent management for schools. And in that model, I'm going to explore a whole range of ideas that are very different to the traditional model for careers in schools, in education. So first of all, I'll start with the why I think there needs to be a new model. And then I'm going to briefly go back through what I could call the old contract, the way things have been done traditionally. Then I'll outline the new model that I'm proposing, and then I'm going to sort of explore, I think, two ways in which schools can change the way in which they go around both teacher recruitment and also around sort of talent management. And then I'm going to open it all up to a debate, and I hope that I'm going to give enough time at the end to have a really healthy debate, because hopefully some of the ideas here are challenging and thoughtful, and will get everyone thinking. So without more ado, I'll head into my first reason why I think we need a new model for talent management in schools. And that's that we're moving into a global recruitment crisis. I mean, the number of people that we need in education to come into education at every level, teaching, middle leadership, senior leadership, is enormous. This was highlighted back in 2016 by UNESCO, and they came up with the statistic that there would need to be 68.8 more teachers globally to fulfill the need for teachers in terms of the growth of education. So that's an enormous expansion of the number of qualified teachers needed in the world, and that's going to cause a problem. In terms of that, those data are really backed up, I suppose, by more recent research. ISC Research have made a projection that by 2030 we would need an additional 505,000 teachers in English-speaking international schools around the world. So in terms of a sort of COBIS context, 500,000 more teachers, and that's really going to be very challenging. So I think that brings into question the traditional model. And alongside that, it's not just about the number of teachers, it's also the fact that we've already got chronic shortages in specialist subjects, particularly around the STEM subjects, and physics is obviously most notably. So all of this is creating a context which means that we may need to change our approach. And the supply chain of teachers has effectively shifted. So the price of teachers, in theory, should go up if we follow supply and demand. But I think it's actually a bit more complicated than that. And perhaps some of the other factors that we might want to consider in light of my second reason why I think we need to have a new model for teacher recruitment and teacher management in schools. So my second one is that we now have significant numbers of millennials working in schools. a large proportion of our workforce are of that millennial generation. And, you know, I'm a great fan of millennials, but they are rather enigmatic, and they certainly approach their careers in a very different way to people of my generation in terms of how we went about things when we were in our 20s and 30s. And, you know, I mean, there's this very critical view of that sort of was, you know, has been around, knocking around for the past decade, that millennials are, you know, are quite needy, that they're always looking for promotion, they're always looking for affirmation, and these sorts of ideas. But I'm not sure that's a particularly fair view of them. I think that's a particularly jaundiced view, and I think it's a very outdated view. I'm absolutely, as I say, a great fan of millennials, and I think they are really interesting and I think they bring an enormous amount, their approach brings an enormous amount to education. They have very different skills. I'm in absolute awe of the teachers that I've got in the school who are in their 20s and 30s. They are unbelievably on it. They are well trained. They are motivated. They've got energy. They are very good at promoting themselves. They're very good at promoting the school. They're up to date. They're ambitious, and I think that gives them a bit of an edge too. So I think all of these things are really exciting, and I think they're challenging traditional pedagogies. They're looking at how teaching can be done, and they've really come into their fore coming out of COVID, because they had the technical skills. They were at the vanguard within every school of how each school was going to deliver home learning. And this has actually established them in terms of their status within the school. And I think they've got a phenomenal future ahead of them. But the thing is, millennials are different. They want different things. For them, it's not just about the money. It's, you know, this idea of there being a short supply and the price going up isn't the whole picture. I mean, yes, I think they're very good at negotiating salaries. I think they have expectations in that area, but I don't think that's their total driver. That other things matter to them. They are totally committed to a work-life balance, which is, I think, probably quite sensible and reassuring. As someone who in my 20s and 30s was working, you know, in the front line in boarding school, you know, 7 days a week, doing enormously long hours with a young family, I think there's a lot that I could learn from their approach of actually, you know, wanting to have a work-life balance. And I think we're going to see that aspect of work-life balance being particularly more important coming out of COVID. People are looking at different ways of working. They're looking at how work fits with home life. People are looking for more flexible working. And I think schools in some ways are going to have to consider this as an approach going forward. The second area is they're committed to making a difference in the world. These are very important. These are very important aspects for many millennials. They want to make a difference. And in some ways, we're in a hugely advantageous position being in education, because education does make a difference. Education makes a difference to people's lives, young people's lives. It allows us to actually impact on the world, to leave the world a better place. And those millennial values that come through, I think, are particularly important. And when we're recruiting and developing, working with millennials, those aspects are at the fore. And related to that is also the idea of values and activism. There are a lot of stuff going on, in terms of companies are, being sort of seen in terms of their ethics, their values become important. Corporate values, corporate ethics, business ethics is becoming a significant part of wider industry and the wider commercial community. Also, activism is becoming an increasing part of business life, and employees or potential employees are aligning themselves with firms that with whom they have shared values. And as I say, schools are well placed. We are a very ethical profession. It's a very noble profession in terms of educating young people. And the final area is in terms of personal development. They want to see themselves develop, and they see that as being an important part of the way in which their employment works. So their professional development, their personal development, their career development, all of these are very, very important aspects for millennials, in a way that wasn't quite the same sort of 20, 30 years ago. So when we come to this, I think that when I interview people, young people, and people in their 20s and their 30s, I'm being asked questions. What training, professional learning opportunities will be available for them? What opportunities for career progression? These are the two most common questions that we're asked, in terms of what can you as a school do for me? And that's a very different approach, and we'll explore that a little bit more as I go through the talk. So I think these two reasons, that the shortage of teachers and the different approach that millennials have, are two very important drivers for why we need a new model for talent management and career management within the schools. So before I explore my new model, I really want to sort of have a look at what I'm going to call the old contract. And this, I suppose, as a caricature, if you like, I'm going to put up Mr. Chips, his Peter O'Toole from the 1969 version of the film, John Hilton's fantastic short story, Goodbye, Mr. Chips. A great read in terms of where it was. I have a particular affection for this book because it was written by John Hilton, who was an old boy of the Lees School. And at the very start of my career, I worked as a young master at the Lees School in Cambridge. And actually, was when he describes the school and so on, it's obviously based on the Lees. But this model, this Mr. Chips model, is one of a career for life. If you don't know the book, Mr. Chips goes all the way through the school, from being a young master all the way through, and becomes the headmaster of the school. And there's a wonderful sort of final line in the when he's sort of on his deathbed. And somebody says, well, you never had any children? And he said, yes, I did. I had hundreds, and most of them, and they were all boys. And his life is dedicated to the school, and he is a sort of lifer. And these people exist. These people exist in the real world, and they exist today. I mean, when I was at Berkhamsted, I used to give a bottle of champagne to colleagues who had completed 100 terms, if I got their century. And in my time there, I gave away 4 bottles of champagne to people who'd completed 100 terms. I mean, that's a lifetime commitment to an institution. And that's really quite extraordinary. And that, I mean, actually, here at Kellett, and you say it doesn't happen in the international community, we had a colleague retire after 37 years a year or so ago, and that's an extraordinary innings. I mean, in terms of Kellett's just coming up for his 50th, so I mean, he'd probably been there for 4/5 of the school's history, and it is the history. So that idea of a career for life is part of the old contract. The next aspect of that old contract was that promotion was very difficult, because it was dead man's shoes. That you didn't get promoted until the person who was doing that job left or retired. And And that changed the whole way in which the career structure worked. It was not about sort of management of things. It was a case of serving your time and getting your place. And certainly when I became a housemaster at Oundle earlier in my career, you served your time. You had to have done a certain number of years. And if there were people, there were people who wanted to be housemasters, housemistresses, and they would serve their time. They would have to sort of effectively work their way up the waiting list. And in those days, it was a 15-year tenure running a house. So it was a very long tenure, and opportunities were few and far between. So as a consequence of that, the sort of Mr. Chips view of things, the old contract, had these enormously long pay scales. When I started working at Radley, the Lees, Radley, Oundle, all had 36-point pay scales that saw you, and your salary went up every year from when you arrived. It wasn't, whether you'd got, it wasn't that you'd got 30 years experience. So 30 years experience, didn't count, counted for money in those days, significantly more, just because you'd been there a long time. It wasn't around quality. It wasn't around doing the same job. It wasn't, there wasn't a sort of any equity in that phase. It was totally ageist in a very positive sense, that the older you got, the more you got paid. And schools in this old contract have sort of developed ways of hanging on to people, in the state sector, and schools that follow that pattern, putting people through threshold was a way of doing it, hanging on to staff, cling on to the staff, this mentality of keeping everybody in that you want in the school, giving people TLRs, giving recruitment retention allowances. These were the tools that a head teacher would use to retain staff, and would promote this long career for life, job for life in the school, this Mr. Chips old model. And so I think that model, it obviously has been eroded, but it is time for a very, very different model. And so I appreciate, as a sort of caveat, that that there is a bit more of a spectrum to this. I've taken one extreme there, and I'm going to perhaps take the other extreme now with what I'm calling my tour of duty model. Now, the idea of a tour of duty is obviously borrowed from the military. The idea that one would go on a tour abroad, you're posted abroad. Obviously in recent years we've seen people posted to sort of Afghanistan. I remember friends from university going to Bosnia and Iraq and these sorts of things. They went on a tour of duty. They went away for a period of time. It might be 2-3 years, being posted away for a very long time, of course, and I think still going. We have people posted to tours of duty in Germany. And so this idea of going on a tour of duty, a fixed period of time with a job to do, whether that's operating, as part of a United Nations force, or whether it's sort of being part of a deterrent, any of this idea of a tour of duty is there. And this model, I think, can be applied to the way in which we look at schools. Now, I should say from the outset, this is not my original idea. This is an idea that was put forward by Reid Hoffman, who was one of the co-founders of LinkedIn, and a couple of his colleagues. Fantastic book, The Alliance, a very easy read, very short read. You'll read it in about 2-3 hours. But it has some very interesting concepts in it. And I think that those concepts are very useful in terms of developing how we share ideas, and how we in terms of a new way of thinking around talent management. And so the way this model works is that it recognizes that schools actually move forward through projects. It's somebody coming in, making a difference, running a project, moving an area of school life forward, and then perhaps moving into a different role, or moving into a different school and leaving. Now, what this sort of tour of duty model has is a different relationship between the employer, the school, and the individual. And what comes out of it is that, is, if you like, a mutually beneficial arrangement whereby people join the school on a tour of duty, and they might be given a role to perform a particular task within the school, move a particular area forward, a particular project. And at the end of that, they might leave, or they might get a different project. So, and what that does for the individual is it gives them, if you like, it develops their portfolio of experiences professionally. It gives them an opportunity, if you like, to get some CV, some really concrete ideas on their CV. And I've been using this model for over 10 years now, and I think it's a particularly exciting model. Asking people to join me, perhaps come into the senior team and have a particular role. And they would come into the team, do that role, and they would then move on. And the conversation at interview at the very outset is around, join me for 3 years, where you will do these projects, we'll do this. I need you to do this for the school. This will give you the benefit for you as an individual. And then at the end of that, I will help you move to the next move. Now, we've just introduced some sort of, we've actually institutionalized this at Kellett next year. And what we've done is we've put in place, we've created 5 assistant head roles within the school. And we were fortunate because we were able to create these roles in one go at one time. One of the appointments had been made the year before, the data and exams role, but the other 4, and again, I created that role the year before. And then these new 4 roles we were able to do because we were able to restructure our senior school management team. And we've created roles, 5 roles in 5 very different areas of responsibility within the school. And the people who have been interviewed for those roles at the interview knew that they would only have that role for 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, we're going to rotate them around. So when they interviewed for the role, they were interviewing not only for a specific role that they had a preference for, but they were also interviewing for the fact that they were going to be an assistant head. And that with that came, if you like, a range of tours of duty. So we have this role of assistant head data and exams. In 2 years' time, he will move into a different role. We haven't decided who's going where yet, so I'm sure there'll be a best fit. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to develop the individual and also to develop for the school. Now, there are huge advantages in this for the teacher. From the teacher's point of view, it develops their skills and experience, it builds a portfolio of experiences for their career progression, and it means that they're learning different aspects of the next role up, whether that's deputy head academic or deputy head pastoral. From the school's point of view, there are huge advantages too, because it gives us greater resilience. So in 2 years' time, I will have 2 people on my senior management team who are experts in data and exams, 2 people on the senior management team who have got expertise in pastoral care at that level, 2 people who have got involved in the professional development and professional learning program for our staff. So I think this greater resilience. So if we end up with one of them leaving at short notice, or not being able to work for a period of time, then we're actually in a really strong position. The second aspect is that this means that there is no time for complacency. These people have to get on with their job. If they're going to make an impact, they know that it's time limited, and they need to move that area, whether that's pastoral care or professional development or co-curricular. They need to set up the structures and so on, or complete their aspects of the project, and those aspects will be agreed with them in advance before they move on in the rotation. And then it also means that there's an element of teamwork and collaboration, because these people are going to take over each other's jobs. So there's a sense in which they need to be a tight team. They're going to need to have each other's backs. They're going to need to learn from each other, and they're going to be able to do that. So this is a really, really exciting way of doing it. And it also allows for internal promotion within the school. So it allows us to be able to have a pool of talent, all of whom are being trained up for that next level. In terms of going on to be a deputy head and taking that process forward. The second real advantage of this is it solves what I call the Goldman Sachs problem. Goldman Sachs is obviously an enormously successful investment bank, and is able to attract the very best talent in the world to their jobs. And this means that their whole talent pool within Goldman Sachs is absolutely extraordinary. But the problem with this is to manage and keep that talent, they have to create space for people to progress. Highly talented, highly able, highly ambitious people need to be able to be promoted. And the Goldman Sachs problem is really what happens is that when they get to a senior level, they might do 10 years as partner in the firm, and someone will come and tap them on the shoulder and say, right, you've had your 10 years as a partner, it's time to make way. And people will then move into different aspects or come out of the company. Now, this approach of sort of creating career opportunities to bring that next generation of talent through is particularly important. Because if they don't do it, the talent will go elsewhere. So you have to have that through flow that actually there is, you need to move aside in order to let the next generation of talent through. And indeed, you were given that opportunity because the generation before you stepped aside in order to do this. Now, I totally appreciate this doesn't fit with a UK state school model. And we are an international schools conference here, and we're talking within the bounds of what we can do within international schools. But I think the UK model, is to some extent flawed. The unionisation of the UK education sector, which doesn't allow people to step aside and drop back into the ranks, or to step aside and take pay cuts, I think is meaning that people are hanging on, and it's causing a lot of the problem because we haven't got this through flow. So one of the things that the tour of duty model does is it solves this Goldman Sachs problem. It solves this dead man's shoes problem. It says, actually, we're going to move people aside at a certain point. When they've had a good go at things, and when it's fair, we will move people aside, and it will be time for them to move on to the next tour of duty. So the conversations that as a head we might have at this point is to say, well, look, you've had a really good run. I've done this at Kelly. You've had a good run running the department, and you're going to move aside. And you've got a choice. You can either leave and go to another school, or you can step back and take on a slightly different role within the school and have a different tour of duty, but it isn't going to be quite the same level. Now, obviously, with international school contracts, we can do that. And actually, the person chose to take a slightly different role in the school. I totally understand and respect that some people won't, and they would choose at that point to move on. That to some extent is fair dues, but taking an overview as a sort of this model of talent management. So, well, actually, we need to create these opportunities. We need to give other people a chance. We need to bring people through is a really important aspect. Admittedly, I understand it's controversial, and perhaps we'll discuss it towards the end, but I think it's a really important part of how we do things. And so one of the things, putting these together, we've developed in terms of our recruitment at Kellett, and I did it previously at Berkhamsted, is to attract people into, and indeed Jess actually, to attract people into the school on the basis that we will also develop that talent. And then people will help them to find the opportunities to take on the next job. Now, sometimes those opportunities will then be inside the school, and sometimes they won't. So that is in essence the tour of duty model. It's about a different approach. So if we sort of put these two alongside each other, we've got this sort of Mr. Chips, sort of the old contract model of a lifetime commitment, 36-point pay scales, of long service awards, dead man's shoes, all the rest of it, clinging onto your talent because you don't want to lose it. Being a totally different approach to having a fixed term commitment, portfolio, a career, embracing many roles in organizations, a talent management program that brings people through and moves people into career opportunities, and you encourage people to grow and to move on. And this is reflected in different ways that interviews are conducted. So, the interview on the old model is a one-way interrogation. Interviewers focus on asking how the applicant can contribute to the school. And the return is the fact that it's all about the job and its remuneration, and that's the salary and benefits packet. In terms of the new model, interviews are a two-way negotiation. The applicant is saying what they can do for the school in a traditional way. The school is also saying, well, this is what we'll do for you. And that's really important as well. And the school is selling how they will develop the interviewee's career and what opportunities and so on. There's also obviously the remuneration stuff, but the key focus is around, this is what we need you to do for us, and this is what we want in our expectations around that, and this is what we can do for you. So that's the new model. So I now want to sort of move on and just move to looking at how you build a sort of talent pipeline, and look and share some of the sort of ideas that we've got around that. So one of the documents that I produce at school with my senior team, and it involves all of the positions of responsibility within school, is our talent management and key worker succession planning document. There are two versions. There's a sort of really top level sort of how, SLT sort of roles, and my role, and my head teacher's roles. And there's also one that goes all the way through. And if I just share with you, this is obviously a totally sort of faked up version that I've produced for this talk, but it will be illustrative of it. So this is around, sort of slightly an element of crisis management around it. If we lost our head of Key Stage 2, Jane Bloggs, at short or no notice, Jenny Bright would take over. And it's really useful to do that, thinking about who would step in if we lost so-and-so, and how we would cover that role if somebody left at short notice. In terms of then, well, who would be a planned departure? Well, there are the various options here. It could be an internal process, it could be an external process. It could be, we could advertise it internally, because we've got a lot of, and only internally. We could advertise it only externally, because we feel we've not got any candidates. We then also look at who are the future candidates for that role. Who do we see who's perhaps too young and too inexperienced to actually take on that role at the moment, but who are the people we're going to develop within the organisation? We also do some sort of RAG analysis, red, amber, green, around whether people are likely to leave, whether they're likely to stay within the next 2 years. So that's quite useful as well in terms, and particularly in international schools, it's very useful to have that idea of who's doing that. So we would look at how we would develop the talent, who we're going to develop in the long run, and also we're looking at where the crisis management is. So I think this is a really important aspect of talent management. And then I suppose that begs the question how you identify that talent in the first place. And so one way we do it is through our annual review. We have an annual review structure where we have, and this is a whole different talk, I suppose, but we have an annual review structure and bar point appraisals, which are two separate processes, but we can go through and we can actually have feedback, self reflections, and then a process that is in terms of an appraisal process that is moderated through the line managers. I think also, we've looked at what other factors we would want to look at. And I think that before anyone is going to move on to the next role, they need to have mastered the role they're in at the moment. So we would expect that there's some element of mastery of their current role. They've got exemplary practice in that place. They might be running projects, or they might be involved in working parties. That would be really important too. There'd probably be fantastic role models, perhaps mentors to staff who are struggling in a particular area. And they need to sort of to some extent show that they're developing themselves. So these are the so we go through a process of identifying who the talent are, and that's captured in the sheet. The other thing we've done to sort of make this work a little bit is that we've created a whole load of training roles within the school, because we recognize that there were quite big jumps in place. So for example, the jump between being a tutor to being head of house is a huge jump in terms of pastoral responsibility and experience, and there was no real mechanism to learn the ropes of being a head of house, which is our sort of pastoral unit. So we've created the role of a deputy head of house. So it's got time against it, it's got a small allowance against it, and the idea is that they will train up and learn the role of head of house. The same might be said of the jump from a head of house to a deputy head. That's a huge jump, and one that we had in place when I arrived at Kellett, and is one that's often in a lot of schools. So we've put the assistant head role, we've got assistant head pastoral role to sort of go through that from the deputy head to deputy head pastoral, and the same really from subject lead going as assistant head again to the assistant head academic, assistant head data and exams, leading into deputy head academic. So those are important aspects. The next one is that we, with this sort of talent sort of management model, people will progress and take on responsibilities. And we acknowledge that some will move on in the school and some will leave. And that was acknowledged from the outset, that we'll actually look at this in terms of who, you would do your tour of duty, and we recognise that some people will leave at the end of that, and some people will go into positions of responsibility. And that's fair enough. And that's happened to us this year. People have finished their tour of duty and we haven't got an opportunity for them in the school. So they've actually moved to other roles. So one other thing is, about, in terms of how this is tied in with a strategic approach to professional learning. So who are the people we're going to sort of invest in various roles? So, who do you support as a school to do the NPQSL, the NPQH, the NPQEL or whatever? I mean, is there a strategic approach? I inherited a totally unstrategic, totally voluntary approach. If you wanted to do NPQSL, you could just do it. Whether that was appropriate or not, I felt it wasn't. So we've sort of changed it so that going forward, it will be tied to people we've identified who are likely to who are likely to go on to roles within the school. And also, I mean, who pays? There is an element of, is this for the individual or is this for the school? So I think that's quite an interesting question to sort of throw up there. So there's a few thoughts on having an approach to becoming a talent pipeline. Sort of moving towards the end of this now. So, I mean, becoming a talent magnet. So this is really around recruitment and how you can use this in terms of things. So I've spoken at a lot of conferences about the fact that I think it's really important that schools to build their employer brand, that they really develop how they look after staff and attract people. And my mantra is put as much into time, energy, effort, resources into recruiting teachers as you do into recruiting students. And we put a lot of energy into how we present ourselves in terms of, as an organization, in terms of recruitment. And that is, in part of it is because we talk about our approach, which I've already shared with you. And that approach is, it's sort of there's a sort of virtuous circle here, this law of attraction that if somebody gets a promotion, even if they go to a school outside, that creates an internal vacancy. It then creates an opportunity for promotion within the school, or it gives us an opportunity to bring in new talent. That then means that we can attract talent, develop talent, and then the whole thing goes round. So whether we're bringing people in and a middle leadership, or we're more likely promoting people up, and then we're able to bring people in the bottom and develop them and bring in some very talented and aspirational people in terms of that. In terms of it, I mean, we openly talk about this on our website. There's a video of me talking about this on the Kellett website, on our recruitment site. The video is there for you to watch. But also this idea of celebrating the success when people go on to other schools. Here I've just put, a handful of people going on to other schools, but into key roles. Our head of science last year, Stuart's gone off to Wellington Hangzhou as a head teacher. Matt went off to be principal at of the senior school secondary head at Bangkok Patna. Our data manager went actually as well, and we've developed him. So this, I think, is also applies to our support staff. This year, Kirsty's gone off to St Thomas's, to Thomas's Clapham in a deputy head pastoral role, and there was an opportunity for her to be developed, to go into one of the assistant headships. She wanted to go back to the UK and was promoted into a deputy headship. Fantastic. One of our deputy heads in the prep has got a headship for next year. So as a talent pipeline, these successes then attract other people. This is the sort of school we're trying, Kellett is the sort of school where people go on and get promoted and are developed both internally and externally. Talk about your values. I mean, we talk a lot about our well-being program, Positively Kellett. That's a really important part of what we do. Again, that's important for these sort of are areas that millennials staff are particularly important in terms of recruitment. We have a large community within our school who are gay, and that's a fantastic part of our school. We've some of the younger members of staff encouraged the school to be involved in a campaign for equal marriage in Hong Kong. We're the only school in Hong Kong to be involved in that project. We're going through accreditation with Educate and Celebrate. And that's really important, because I mean, I've had people I've interviewed this year, I've asked them why they've applied to Kellett, and they said, well, we know that you're very open, you're an open school, you're an inclusive school, I'm gay, and I know that I will be comfortable at Kellett. And I think that's very important for us as a school. We get people to talk about, on the website, we have, stories, case studies, so you can find yourself when you're applying for a job. I think this is really important. Also, don't forget your alumni. I mean, just because people are leaving you doesn't mean they necessarily aren't going to come back. There's a fantastic article which has just recently been published last month in Harvard Business Review on this. But we've set up, and again, this is an idea from the Alliance, from the Reid Hoffman book, to have an alumni group. So we have a former past and present staff group. And we have started something called Linked, where we have a range of topics that we talk about. We did a well-being discussion, and we drew on the expertise of people who had left us and gone to other schools, talking about how did they take the Positively Coloured program, how did they embedded it in the schools that they've gone on to run. We've got one actually this week on professional development, and we've got some sort of Kellogg staff alumni coming back to talk on that from around the world about how they do professional development in different contexts as well. So that's it really. That's my pitch for a new model and the reasons and some of the ways in which schools can do it. Just two bits of reading, I suppose, on it. One is the Alliance, which I've always mentioned. I wrote a TES article on this previously. It's got some of those ideas. I think I'll put them, unpack them a little bit here. And so here's my contact if you want to get hold of me. But let's have a bit of a debate, I guess, and let's have some discussions. Hopefully people have sent through some questions or some discussions, and I'll have a go at trying to answer them.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. I really appreciate that. Just two things I should point out. First of all, I'm joining you today from Clapham, so it's great to see Clapham get a shout out. Really enjoyed that. And also, I put a link in the chat there for more information about Positively Coloured. Kellett were actually awarded beacon status from COBIS for their work on wellbeing, which is a mark of excellence. Not every school gets it. So I do encourage you guys to read more about their wellbeing work. They've done some great stuff there. Some great questions in the chat. David Cook has said, there's some really exciting idea of project-based appointments, but is there a valedictory element for the members of staff, or if the objective is achieved before the end of the fixed period?
So I have to read that again. Is there a valedictory? Yeah, I mean,
yeah. So if the objective is achieved before the end, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of projects we're looking at. So I give you. I think it's pretty easy to talk about some concrete examples. So one of the projects I've set the new assistant head data and exams is to move a lot of the way in which we manage data onto Power BI dashboards. He's a particularly super bright guy, sort of imperial physics and maths type guy, and he's gone through, and he's working with a fantastic deputy head in the prep, and they're working on using Power BI dashboards, and that's a really important thing. I mean, his skills are particularly unique, so we want to make sure we capture that, and so he knows he's got a sort of 2-year event horizon to get that sort of thing done. But yeah, I mean, I think I think there is a element of celebration around this. I think that people can complete projects and they can feel, well, I really own that. I mean, I brought in a fantastic director of sport, and he's had a real impact. His tour of duty was to actually set up a program between, that ran from year 3 to year 13, and that's work in progress, and he's bringing people in to that program, and we're developing things there. So I mean, that one's on the sort of less of a sort of fixed thing, but there was certainly this is your piece of work that you need to do during that time. And I think the good thing about this is it's about individuals owning stuff and saying, well, look, I did that, as an individual, and it's not, oh, Kellett did that, but I mean, but also people can take some personal ownership over it and say, well, look, I really did this, and this is, this was something and they could highlight it when they applied for a job. And also, I mean, we then, you know, with say Nav and his data project, you know, he can train. Part of it will be training people up in you know, to do what he's doing. So I think that's a really important part of it. But I think this idea of, you know, sort of celebrating people's projects and them having the, you know, a degree of ownership over them and oversight is, I think, really important.
Absolutely, it's really empowering. We've got a question from Walin Nyamota, who's joining us from Braeside School in Nairobi in Kenya. She said it was a great presentation. Does the population of the school come into consideration when you're creating these 5 assistant head positions? I suppose, how would a smaller school approach that?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, oh God, how many have we got? That's a good question. I think we've got something in the region of 500, 600 people in our senior school. We've consolidated other roles to create these roles. I think it doesn't really matter to some extent, you know, how many people you've got. I mean, with that rotation, it's quite exciting and obviously quite novel. But, you know, the idea that, you know, you're going to be assistant head for 3 years and then you're likely to get promoted and saying, you know, what are you going to do in that period of time, and is really important too. I think one of the interesting things that I think the assistant head role is it's about having a very clear idea of what an assistant head is. And I think that they get dumped in a lot of schools. They get created to, you know, for this sort of single area of responsibility. In fact, one of the roles we had that at Kellett, one of the roles had just been given, you know, and he'd sat in the role for quite a while. And that the idea of actually having some rotation, the idea that you're going to develop, and all of this is premised, of course, on the fact that people want to do the next job. So, you know, when I'm interviewing for an assistant head, I want people who want to be a deputy head or a head. You know, I mean, that it doesn't work if you just want to be an assistant head. And in fact, that's not the sort of school we are. I mean, you know, I think that's when schools start stagnating and you end up with dead man's shoes. So if you want people who I just want to be a deputy head, I think that's not great, because then you just get, the whole organization gets stuck at that point. So, you know, I think my conversation around that would be, well, you might want to just be a deputy head, but, you know, you've had your 5-6 years here. It's probably time for you to find another one then, because I want to bring talent through. But I think you've just got to create that culture within the school where that's understood and part of it all.
Absolutely. Jay McGuire has said, how do you get people to take on projects that won't be completed within 2-year cycles? Because some changes, or maybe even culture, will take longer to embed. And do you think staff then therefore only opt for easy, measurable projects?
No, I don't think. I think sometimes you might say, well, look, actually, you've got to get this to this point, and then, you know, I think all of these areas. I mean, I don't think it's about necessarily the incumbent necessarily deciding what the project is. The school, to some extent, needs to decide what the project is. There has to be a bit of negotiation around it. And in life, we're forever taking over someone else's project. But in the context of my rotation of assistant heads, I'm sure there'll be projects there that don't get finished within the 2 years. But the thing is, you become accountable. You know, if you've sat in your hands for 2 years, then, you know, and somebody's going to come into that role and know you've sat on your hands. If you've really shoved it forward, then, you know, then they're going to know the same. So I think it's about creating that professional culture where people do that. But I think you've also got to do, I mean, I'm all for designing things in such a way that somebody can step in tomorrow. I mean, I try to document my role and what I'm doing, such that if I'm knocked over by a bus, somebody can pick up tomorrow. And I think I encourage that approach in every area. So I think there are going to be projects that don't finish in 2 years, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be rotating around. I mean, it's nice if people get it over the line or get aspects over the line, but certainly, you know, and projects can often be phased, and 2 years is a pretty, 2 years is a good length of time. You should be able to have an impact in 2 years.
Nice. And one more question from John Jones, who said, does your approach also apply to heads of schools? Inevitably, senior leaders will want your job.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is true too. I mean, I think people should. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important that I train up, my successor, or at least there's a potential successor within the school. It's up to the board, obviously, whether they appoint that person to the role. But yeah, I mean, I think the deputy heads should want to be the head. The heads should, want to be the principal. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think, at some point, you've got to manage yourself out of a situation. And that's right. But you've got to leave it. I think this model also highlights the importance of succession planning, both in terms of crisis succession planning, but also in terms of long-term planning. And one that I didn't talk about it in the main talk, but I mean, one of the things that when you do that grid and you go through is when you get a single point of failure. You go, look, if X is knocked over by the bus, we're really stuffed, because we haven't got a second person who can teach media studies. So our head of media, we haven't got a second person who can teach this, or we haven't got anybody who's got any knowledge of this. And then you have to start working on how to do things and training people up. And that then informs your professional development. So that whole cycle is a very, very good audit to do.
Nice. And one more question from Nadia. She said, how often do you have conversations with people who have been in the same job for a while and show no sign of moving on, even if they do a very good job?
Well, I think you've got to provide people with challenges, and there are people in the organisation who've done the same job for a long time. And there aren't necessarily people knocking on the door, so it's not necessarily, that is not a problem. But I think where you've got talent coming through, and you want to keep that talent coming through, then I think there should be an expectation that people shouldn't be doing the same thing year in, year out. And it's the old mantra, isn't it? It's whether it's 10 years experience or 1 year's experience 10 times over. And in a lot of cases, I mean, it's my fourth headship, and I've worked with colleagues who have had 1 year's experience 20 times over, and that's not the sort of person I want to be working in the school. I want people who are moving it forward. If you're doing the same thing this year and next year and ever, all the time, then in most cases it's going to get pretty stale after a while.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Mark, for your time. That was a great session, some really great questions there, some great delegate participation. Just so everyone knows, this is going to be recorded and it's going to be uploaded onto the Whova app. So if you feel inspired by this, you want to show it to your board, show it to your senior management, you can do that in your own time and maybe take some of these ideas on board back into your schools, which would be great. We've got a plenary session later on from the chair of the Times Commission, so do tune into that one. It's going to be fantastic. And we'll see you all later in the conference.
Yeah, and I'll just finish by saying that presentation is on my blog, and I'll put the link to the slides if you want to see them. I'll put a link up on Twitter on the COBIS 22 feed, so people can access it that way. It's been a great pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Bye, everyone.